Glad to see everyone here. I know many of you are not here because you're suffering with the flu, and so they're probably watching this later on this week. And so I'm going to go ahead and say that we missed you, and we hope you get feeling better. But I'm really glad with the number of people we see here. This is great. So for those of you who don't know who I am, let me go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Mason Powell. I am the teaching co-pastor here at the Bluff. And we do this thing at the beginning of every service where we stop and we give a round of applause to someone in our church who has served, who's represented Christ well, because we believe that here at the Bluff, everyone matters. And that everyone belongs here. And that what happens here on Sunday morning isn't about whoever's preaching. It is about the people of God coming together to represent God together very well. And this morning, we have actually a lot of things to applaud and be grateful for. So last Sunday, we had the bread shed right after the service where we had a number of our members out serving the community and providing meals. And I think the last number I heard was 165 meals served from our church. So that's awesome. Let's give a round of applause for all those people. As well as some of us yesterday on Saturday were delivering beds for Sleep in Heavenly Peace. I don't know what the number is, but still the fact that there are people in this church body who want to help provide a bed for the kids in our community who don't have that is something that we can be very proud of. So let's give a round of applause for them as well. And then third and finally, 2 weeks ago, we gave a round of applause to the baby boomers within our church because we believe that these individuals are the matriarchs and patriarchs, they're the councils of wisdom within our church, and they matter. And last week, we gave a round of applause to the Gen Xers, those who are really the working class of our entire civilization now, it seems, who are putting a lot on their shoulders as they're trying to raise kids and raise their parents. Let's just be honest about that, okay? And so that's a difficult generation. Like, you're carrying a lot. And so we gave a round of applause in recognition to you guys. But this morning, we want to give a round of applause to both the millennial generation in our church as well as the Gen Yers. And here's why. Because these two generations get a lot of bad heat in church, where people are always complaining about them. But here at the Bluff, we don't do that. I mean, I'm a millennial, okay? So I'm glad we're not like that, okay? But you guys, as millennials, you are needed in this church because you help bring new life. You're very innovative as a generation, and that is a good thing. And so I think I've been making it very clear that everyone is needed, and you guys are part of that as well. So let's give a round of applause for those two generations. Yeah. Like I've said before, everyone here can belong here and everyone here matters here to make what we do on a weekly basis happen, and we are grateful for that. So last week, we kicked it off this brand new series called Rooted, and we're kind of looking at what are the roots and the foundations of our Christian faith. And this is going hand in hand a lot with our small group curriculum that we're doing, which is also called Rooted. So a lot of it's based off of that. And so last week, we answered life's biggest question out there. Of who is God. And the answer we came to was that God is madly complex and he is madly in love with us. Like we saw how he's a warrior, he's a poet, he's a creator, and yet at the same time, he is madly in love with us. Like the Bible is filled with that. You read like Psalms. Psalms talks on and on about this concept. You read chapter 8 and it says in verse 3, it says, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you're mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? So the Bible is very big on talking about how big and how glorious this God is and how madly in love he is with us. But that brings several questions after it. Like after we get to that conclusion, there are a couple things that we have to answer, that we have to get to the bottom of what this God is. And the first one, the one that really gets under my skin, is how can God, this madly complex God, how can he stand to be in our presence and still be God? Would not being in our presence tarnish the very reputation and the identity of God? Like how can God still be God and be in our company? Or on the flip side, how can we even survive in his company? I mean, think about it. I think we wrestle with this from time to time. Because it's easy to say God is madly complex, but doesn't being in bad company like ourselves, doesn't that kind of tarnish his reputation? Like parents, you raise your kids with the same philosophy, where you don't want your kids hanging out with drug dealers and gangsters and the troublemakers and stuff like that because you're afraid that's going to tarnish their reputation and their character and that they'll become like that. So you tell your kids, hey, avoid that. And that's true. Like, I'll be honest, with my own life, I got in trouble a lot as a kid because of the people I was hanging out with. Like, you go back to the church I grew up in, and they will tell you horror stories. Like, Mason was the kid who was always going around breaking everything in every room and putting holes in the walls. And, like, some of them would probably be shocked to hear that I'm a pastor now. Like, I even got kicked out of a Christian summer camp once. Like, you got to be pretty bad to do that because of the guys I was hanging out with as a kid. Like, bad company corrupts good manners, right? Like, we talk about this all the time in our society. Parents, this is how we raise our kids. So would the same not be true for us and God? Like, how could God be holy and righteous and all that he is and remain as such in our company? Or on the flip side, how could we even survive in that company? I'm not judging or denying that God loves us. I'm saying, let's just think practically, how can God be involved in our lives, even despite his love for who we are? Now, I know this is not a concept or a conversation that you might be wanting to have this morning, because maybe you come here and you've got a list of problems. You're like, hey, I'm stressed out with work. Hey, my marriage is on the rocks. Hey, this relationship or this situation is just really stressing me. I need some help in this. Or maybe it's just something internally that's going on with you. And you're here because you're wanting to find the cure, the relief for that. And so the idea of talking about how could God be in our situations doesn't seem very practical when you're like, I want the solution to my current problem. But let me be very clear here. This is a necessary conversation in order to have those other conversations. Because unless we can clearly define and explain and understand why God can be involved in our lives, then we cannot even ask him to be involved in these other areas of our lives. So if you want help with God in your marriage, then you have to first stop and think, how is this even possible for him to be involved? And we all want that. We want God involved in different areas of our lives and stuff like that, but we have to be understanding and willing to see, hey, there's something very grave that God had to do in order to make himself accessible to us. Look at the Israelites as an example. In the book of Exodus, there's this big story, right at the beginning, of Moses and the plagues and all that, and all the links which God has gone to win his people, okay? And this is a crucial moment right after he's freed them, where he then invites them, hey, come to this mountain. I want to reveal myself to you. I want to draw near to you. Let's be one together. Let's be close to each other. And so the Exodus is in chapter 20. It's a very crucial moment in the story of humanity. Because if you read Genesis, everything was in perfect harmony once with God. And then the rebellion came up, us rebelling against God, and things were broken. And you read through Genesis of God investing in a family and building that into a nation and says, hey, I'm going to win you. And he wins them from Egypt and slavery. And it seems like this is the point where everything is going to be fixed. God has rescued his people. Now he's going to draw near to them and they're going to be one again. That's what Exodus 20 feels like. But here's the story. When God appears, and it's like thunder and lightning, smoke and fire on this mountain, here's how the people respond to this situation. It's in Exodus chapter 20, verse 18. It says, now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpets and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled. And they stood far off and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us. See, the people got a chance to finally get to draw near to this God, and they realized we can't be in his presence and survive. And the same is true on the other end. That even though God has rescued us, there's still the sin problem. So there has to be some sort of solution, because God and us cannot coexist in the same place without a solution being present. Because this madly complex God is vastly different than us. The space between us is much greater than when we say to our kids, hey, don't go hanging out with drug dealers. Like, the vast differences is vaster. So there has to be a solution here. And I think internally we all know this, and we all operate from this. That's why we're nervous to talk to God. It's not, hey, just a matter of public speaking. Like, I get that. It's kind of nervous to talk in front of people and talk to God in front of people. I get how that can be nerve-wracking. But I'm talking about on your own. That this is probably one of the reasons why you struggle to pray. Because in your mind, you're probably thinking, what if what if I get rejected by him? Because it's easy just to keep God distance of saying, God, you're big and vast and I love you, and just to keep things like that. But to actually draw near to this God, there's that little anxiety of what if he rejects me? What if he starts to discover what I already know about myself, that I can't be loved? So maybe if I just keep the distance, and if I just stay with the fact that I'm satisfied of a God is big and that he loves me, and I don't go any deeper than that, maybe it's safe for me there. I think this is oftentimes why we don't pray and why we struggle with this. And it wasn't always like this. Like I said, in Genesis, it starts out with God has created Adam and Eve, and they're walking hand in hand, and it's in perfect harmony. And then we messed up. We rebelled against God. And God, his love prevailed, and he's trying to bring things back to the way they once were. And so right after that story in Exodus, where the people are like, we don't want to draw near to God. And Moses, you be the scapegoat. You be our sacrifice. You just go and be near to God, and you just come back and tell us what he said, okay? Like, at that moment, God kind of puts a new system in place. Where in order for humanity to be able to draw near to God and be safe in his presence, and for him to still remain as God, there was two things that God put in place. One were sacrifices. And that humanity now had to pay in the form of animal sacrifices before they can draw near to God. Because their sin required punishment. As we talked about last week, for the wages of sin is death. Our sin required punishment. So they would have to bring an animal that fit with the crime, and they would have to go and sacrifice it before they could even pray to God. Before they could bring their request to God and say, God, here's my problem. Like, before they could do any of that, they had to go through these sacrifices. And this wasn't a one-time deal and then, hey, they're done. This is like, hey, you said this bad word, now go kill this cow over here, and then you're good for maybe like 5 or 10 minutes until you did something else, and now you got to go get another animal to pay for your sins. Like, this is an ongoing thing. The second thing that was put in place is that God established a priesthood. And the priest's role were to be the ones who were sacrificing the animal, who were supposed to be the best of humanity. And they were supposed to stand in the gap between humanity and God and try to bridge the gap. So they would sacrifice the animals for the people. And then they would go and bring it to God, saying, here's the sins that everyone has done. And then they would go back to the people and say, here's God's forgiveness and grace. Go and don't do that again. But they know that person's going to come back. In fact, the book of Hebrews describes in chapter 5, verse 1, the role of a priest. It says, for every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices. So these, like I said, are the best, and they serve to stand in the gap between humanity and God, trying to pull things together. And the best that they're able to do is to constantly do these sacrifices. But imagine how depressing that would feel. Because old Joe comes and he says, hey, I've cheated on my wife, or I've cheated on my taxes, or something like that. And he then offers up a bull, and you know a week later he's going to come back and do the exact same thing. And the problem's not going to be solved. It's like if you were to stumble and you broke your arm and the bone is sticking out, their system was nothing more than take a rag and let's just dab at the blood. It's just to maintain like the problem. We don't want it getting it worse. That's essentially the job of the priest, but it's not healing. It's not putting the bone back in. And that was essentially the job of the priest, that they're just trying to keep things from getting worse. And all the time they have this story that God is going to step in to this temporary problem, and he's going to fix it. That this is not going to be all that there is. There's going to come a point in time where God is going to step in. He's going to bring back his promises. He's going to make a way for us to be with him. But no one expected it in the form of which it came. And the fact that Jesus came and that he offered up his own life as the sacrifice. As Hebrews says, in verse 7 of that same chapter, it says, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. So that's Jesus crying out on our behalf. And it goes on in chapter 5, verse 9 now, it says, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now, I don't have the time to really talk about the order of Melchizedek, and so we're just going to put that on the back burner right now. And I'm going to get to that high priest role here in a second, but I really want to zone in on the verse right there, or the phrase that says, source of eternal salvation. And what that's saying is that if someone messed up, they would have to go and basically kill a lamb in payment for their sins. And he's saying Jesus has stepped into that role, that he has offered up himself as the sacrifice for our salvations, that he has taken the place where no one else could take, to be the one to bring us to God by his own death and resurrection. That's why Paul says in the book of 1 Corinthians says, for I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. So what he's saying is Jesus was the perfect sacrifice. So like the temporary solution of let's have these lambs constantly being killed and things like that, he's saying, look, Jesus stepped in, offered one sacrifice himself, and it appeased the sin burden of everybody. All of our sin. All of our past sin, what we're currently doing now, and what we're going to be doing in the future, Jesus paid for it all. He paid for himself by offering up his life, having his blood spilled on our behalf to be the sacrifice that we couldn't be, so that we would have the beginnings of a bridge towards God. And he did this because he is the better priest. Here's what the remarkable thing of what was just said about him being the order of Melchizedek and the high priest. He's saying, the author is saying, look, Jesus is not only the sacrificial lamb, he's the priest offering up the sacrificial lamb on behalf of the people. That he has fit into this unique role of being the priest for all of humanity. That's why if we jump to chapter 7, verse 22, it says, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office, but he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. So the old system was temporary, remember? Like it was just a Band-Aid. It wasn't actually fixing the bone. It wasn't actually fixing the problem. But Jesus is the guarantee of a better covenant because what he did perfectly satisfied it. What he did was something that none of us could do. And he has stepped into a role that was so desperately needed as the promise that God gave, that this is going to be the means of which I'm going to bring people back to God. And so Christ stepped into this role. And he was our better priest. That's why it continues on. Verse 25 says, consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Meaning, all are welcome now to be part of God's family. Like this is not a Jewish thing like it originally started. This is open for anybody. It doesn't matter what your age is, what your social class is, what's your economic class, what's your heritage, what's your skin tone. Everybody is now welcome into this family of God because there are no barriers with the gospel. The gospel breaks down walls. It's not building up walls. It's breaking them down so that anyone has the potential to now come and be what they were meant to be in a restored relationship with God because of what Jesus done. Going on from there, verse 26 says, for it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. This is just going again to show how much better the work that Jesus has done for our benefit. Like we don't have to keep going to God and say, God, I'm sorry, I messed up in this again, and think that God is now having to sacrifice Jesus again. No, it's once and done. Meaning that our old life is now dead because of Jesus. Because he put it to rest. So it's not saying that we can't go to God when we mess up. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we no longer have to have the pressure and the feeling like we're hurting God again, or we're thinking that like he's going to be sacrificed on a cross again. No, it was once and done. And that's something that was remarkable. That's something that was unthought of in that day and age, that just one single act took care of everything. Going on from there, we get to see that the work of Jesus is immensely more than what the priests of that day and age were able to do. So we jump to chapter 9 now, and it says in verse 11, it says, "But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption." So let's go back to that analogy about the person who's broken their bone and the bone sticking out. Basically, like I said, the Old Testament, their priestly system of sacrifices was just dabbing at the blood. Let's just maintain. Let's keep this from getting worse. But Jesus, what he offers is something that goes to the very core root of the problem and fixes it. Because only in his sacrifice is there the promise of redemption. See, the Old Testament system was like, let's just handle the surface level problem. But Jesus is much more interested in going at the heart of the man and the woman. And let's change that. Let's bring redemption into that. And I think if we're honest, that's something we all want. We all, at the end of the day, we want redemption. We want what we have done to be paid for. And so oftentimes people are trying to earn it on themselves. And what he's saying is Christ has already provided the redemption that we so desperately want. Going on from there, verse 13 says, "For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God?" Like, I think we take for granted the luxury which we get to have in our day and age. That we don't have to live in a system where we feel like, great, I've messed up. Now I've got to go buy this bull. I've got to go take it to this person who I know is a sinner as well, who I know is just as messed up as me, and ask them, will you sacrifice this for me? I think we take it for granted, the luxury we have, that Christ stepped into our problem. So it's no longer upon our shoulders to be perfect, to have everything figured out. But Christ has stepped in to be what we can never be, to give the life which we also desperately wanted, the redemption that people for centuries so long that we get the luxury of living in the time frame of knowing that Jesus has paid it all and that we get to be with Jesus and that we don't have to be the person we were before because of Jesus. I think we take that for granted a lot of times. Of him as this high priest who's not only our sacrifice, but has stepped in the gap between us to bridge the two. But it gets even better. It says in verse 15, it says, "Therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant." Meaning, like I said, that Jesus is standing in the gap now. That we don't have to fear God, that we don't have to fear his holiness and his justice and thinking, great, I've messed up. Now God's going to throw down the lightning bolts. God is going to kill me. This is going to be awful. As a Christian, we don't have to fear that relationship anymore. Like a while back, I saw on Facebook this post talking about the differences between a religion and the gospel. Religion is, great, I've messed up. Now I need to go fix this. I need to hide what I've done. The gospel is, great, I've messed up. I need to go to my Father and ask him for help. Like that's the luxury which we get to live in now. This is what it's talking about, that we get to live in a state where no longer are we trying to hide or be better or be perfect, but now we can openly say, I've messed up. God, won't you come and save me? And knowing that we don't have to be afraid of him. Knowing that he cares for us, that he has filled the gap between us to make the way for us to be with him. But you know what? His work is not finished. I get really giddy at these next two passages, so let me just read them. As you see that Jesus did more than just save us from our sins and fill the gap in between us. He did so much more. He's working even now. It's in these verses. Chapter 8 now, verse 1. It says, "Now the point in what we are saying is this. We have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places, and the true tent that the Lord set up, not man." And then in chapters 9, it says, verse 24, it says, "For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf." So get this. What it's saying is, it's not only has God sent Jesus to die for our sins so that we can be healed, so we can be restored. But now, even in this moment, we have an inside man in heaven. We have an advocate right now who is in the presence of God, talking to God on our behalf. Like, that's like praiseworthy. Like, that should blow your mind, people. Go home, read the Gospels. Let me give you some homework. Go home, read the Gospels. Any one of them will do. If you want to read a short one, read the Gospel of Mark. And as you're reading, think about this. The Jesus that you are reading and seeing is right now up in heaven talking to God on your behalf. Like, I imagine if we could get a glimpse into heaven right now and just to picture what's going on, I imagine that we would just be blown away hearing that Jesus is constantly talking to God about us. Like, imagine with me, maybe right now, Jesus saying, hey, God, do you see Keith Hefner? Oh, he's a good man. He's taking care of his family. He's protecting his community. Why don't we go and encourage him and let him know that we're proud of him? Or maybe he's saying right now, hey, God, do you see Cindy? Cindy does a great job leading the Bluff kids ministry at the church. Why don't we encourage her and let her know that we're proud of her? Or maybe he's saying, hey, God, do you see Daryl and Jennifer? They're taking care of Peyton and Tristan. Let's let them know that we're proud of them and that Peyton and Tristan are loved. Well, maybe God is saying that right now. Or maybe God is saying, hey, do you see Coach Severs? On Fridays, he leads a Bible study at the high school. Let's let him know that we are loving that he's doing that and we're proud of him. Like, maybe God is saying that right now, saying something on your behalf. Or maybe he's just looking at us as a church right now and he's saying, God, there are people at the Bluff Church who have lost some loved ones recently. Let's remind them that they're still loved and that you're still good. Like, I don't know what God is talking to God about or what Jesus is talking to God about right now about you, but I do know this. It's good. And it's for your betterment. It's because he's got your back. It's because of every minute of every day, he's constantly saying to God, remember this individual who you love. Let's work for their behalf. Let's work for their good. Like, that should give you goosebumps, people. Like, that should get you excited. That no matter what situation you're going through, Jesus already knows what it is. He has stepped into that place and he is talking to God about you for the situation you're in or what's to come or whatever it is. He is talking to God about you right now. That is awesome. And what confidence that then gives us to be able to draw near to God knowing that Jesus has pulled us together and that whatever we say, we're confident he hears us and he knows us. That's why in Hebrews chapter 4, the whole thesis of the entire book, it says in verse 14, it says, since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So let me recap, okay? Because I know I've covered a whole lot. Basically, like I said, we had a problem where God is mighty, God has a mighty love as well, but there's this problem of our own sin that has separated us. This relationship is broken, and now we cannot coexist without one of us destroying the other. And so God intervened, and he sent Jesus to be our sacrifice, to pay the price which none of us could pay, but which we so desperately needed. And then he stepped into the role of our high priest to be our advocate before God. And then even at this very moment, he's talking to God about us so that humanity and God can be bridged together. So the whole big question of how can God have a relationship with us? How could God speak with us and we could hear from him and things like that? And us speak to him in return without one of us destroying the other has been answered in this single truth of Jesus, the faith that we have in Jesus. And it's this truth right here, that God has made the way possible for you to be with him. God has made the way possible for you to be with him. That's a game changer. Let me tell you why, because there's so oftentimes we feel like, hey, God is big and mighty and we love him, but so oftentimes we feel like we can't get near to him. Like he's a fire, and if we get too close, we might get burned. But we don't have to worry about that anymore. Like he's not going to reject us. It's not like he just went to all this work to earn you and to have a relationship with you, that he's just going to start thinking, oh, hey, I invested too much in this. You're not worth it. Like, this is not anymore. This is not good anymore, so we're done. Like, he's not going to get to that point because he has made the way possible for you to have a relationship with him. One where you don't have to be perfect. Your life doesn't have to be all together. In fact, if you take a minute and you look around the room and you look at yourself and stuff like that, you quickly realize none of us have our lives all together. Like, it might seem like that on the surface, but once you get to know everyone and things like that, like, everyone has issues and problems. Everyone has those things that make them feel little and make them feel less than perfect, make them feel rejected and things like that. That's not our God who's giving you those emotions. That shame, that rejection, whatever it is, that's not our God who's doing that. But what our God is doing is he's defending us. He's fighting for us. He's loving us. And he's talking to God for our benefit. What courage that should give us then to be able to talk to God, to be able to hear him speak, to be able to spend time with him without fear, without worry. I know you're thinking, that's great and all, but I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to start. Hey, this is super easy, all right? You can do this in your head because God hears your mind as well, so you don't have to have some magic words. It's as simple as saying, hey, God, how you doing? And the rest will just come on out. It's as simple as that. And that's a luxury which people for thousands of years have wanted. And we get the benefit of that. Knowing that just because we have faith in Jesus and what he has done, we are basically invited into the very presence of God to bring whatever issue we have, knowing that he knows it, that he cares for us, that he knows us, and he has the best intentions for us. What confidence that should give us then to be able to speak to him. So all the people who always think, oh, God doesn't care for us, God doesn't want to talk with us. He went to such great lengths to have a relationship with you. You're thinking, well, I don't understand why. He's great, and he's loving. And I don't fully understand why sometimes myself, why would this mighty God want to have a relationship with us? But it's true, he does. And it's wonderful. And so that's crucial to what we do here at the Bluff. Like, we want people who are connected to God, who are talking with God, who understand all that God has done for them, and then they live from that. They don't live from the lies of loneliness and rejection and shame that just is screaming in our world, but we rest in the hope that God has made the way possible for us to be with him. And it's not on our shoulders, so we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have our lives all together. We don't have to have the right knowledge or the magic words or whatever, or anything like that. We just simply have the courage to say, Jesus, I need help. I love you. Won't you help me in this situation? And we know our request is immediately given to the ear of God. We praise him for that. And that's crucial to what we do. We as a church, we need to be praying for each other. Dave and I, we covet your prayers because what we do day after day to bless you guys, to serve you guys and stuff like that is only possible when there are people who are praying for us, who are praying for each other. So you need to be connected with God, and the people sitting next to you need you to feel a connection to God. To not be afraid of God anymore, but to understand that you can come to God with whatever is going on in your life, and that you have a relationship with God because we need that about each other. I've said many times, Jesus matters more than us, and this proves it. But I also have said that life is not about you, but it's about him. And this in turn also proves it because we need each other to have a relationship with God because the most important thing about you is your relationship with Jesus more than anything else. And what luxury then we have to pray to him. So this week in your rooted small groups, you're going to be talking about what does it mean to hear from God? How does God speak to us? And either this week for those of you in your group or sometime in the future, you're going to have a very unique prayer experience where for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, you're not going to gather to do Bible study or anything like that. You're going to gather for one purpose only, and that's to be able to pray to God in a way maybe you've never prayed to God before, where it's going to be real, it's going to be vulnerable. You're going to probably hear God speak to you probably the first time ever or in a long time. And we get that luxury of being able to do that because of Jesus. We don't have to go sacrifice a bunch of animals. We don't have to be perfect. There's only one requirement, and that's we believe in who Jesus is and what he's done, and we live from that. So stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to be something you're not. Stop trying to be that false self. You can be real and vulnerable with God because he loves you and he cares for you. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much. You have made the way possible for us to have a relationship with you. You are mighty. You are madly complex. You are madly in love with us, but we are incapable of getting ourselves to you. But you initiated the relationship, and you made all the requirements met in you so that we could have that relationship with you. And now all that's required of us is just to believe, and we get to reap all the benefits of knowing that you're talking to God about us, that you're fighting for us, that you're defending us, and that you love us. We are so grateful for that, Father. I ask that we might go forward in that confidence. Draw us near to you. Make us more in love with you, Father. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
Unrelenting grace, never failing mercy.